in these tough COVID times, it's great to be able to at least come together via the technology, isn't it? And as I sit in my backyard in Australia, garden, we're in lockdown in Sydney, like many other people around the world. And we have to learn lots of different things during this time. One of the things we think through, or for me, I've been thinking through over the past few weeks, is how can we still reach out to other people and help them with the message of Jesus through all the situations they go through in life. And it's something that is always on my mind, but even more so during this time. I've been reading in Luke chapter 9 and chapter 10 about the disciples, the apostles, and the 70 people being sent out to tell people about Jesus, to heal, to do other miraculous things, to get alongside, live with people, and to share the message of transformation. And I was thinking that through and wondering, is this really about loving others into God's kingdom? And that's a great thing if it is. Now, loving others into God's kingdom, some questions came. What does this mean? What is loving people into God's kingdom all about? A number of other questions that then came as well. How is it to be done? Who should do it? Should I do it? And why should I do it? When must I do it? Where do I do it? And how can I help others, perhaps, to do this as well? Disciple making, helping others to learn how to bring others through love into God's kingdom. So the two passages in Luke are pretty much the same. The apostles had a little bit more capacity and freedom than the other 70. They were to travel light. They were to see if people befriended them or took them in, and if they didn't, they weren't to stay around. They were to move on to other places and people in other towns. It was a living experience. It was their life had to match their words. Their life had to match everything that they said in this place. And I was thinking through that, and as I've been also reading another book, or a book in this past time called about the patient fermenting of the early church, the writer organises his thoughts around early writings from the church fathers in the first 4 centuries of the church. One of the key things that's coming through as I'm just reading the early parts of this book is that these people really emphasised patience. They didn't go and rush things. They weren't always in a hurry. They weren't always thinking that everything had to be crammed into a short space of time and as much as possible crammed into that to enjoy life. Patience, through the different early writers, was key. And the patience that we're looking at here is not a patience which doesn't do anything, but it was a patience that talked about, rather than speak a lot of words that don't mean much, you don't live up to, that you can never hope everyone else can live up to, your living of your life was far more important than just speaking perhaps meaningless words. The living of your life, the integrity, the honesty, the compassion and the passion for truth and for the right and for Jesus and for living like him really is what stood out. And the writer of this book says that from his research, many people who came to the early church came because of relationships that were built. Not that they were persuaded by arguments or words of wisdom but it was more that the early Christians lived their life in such a way that it was different to the rest of the world. Part of that was living in, if things weren't going right, that they didn't live in fear. They lived in faith and trust. They were also generous, and they were, in their business dealings, honest and not extracting unnecessary fees, even helping people with not foreclosing when they couldn't pay a loan if there were some particular difficulties, but they'd work it through. Now, he says that there were certainly people in the early church who weren't like that, but this was the aim, this was the majority. There were people who were living as Jesus taught. They were looking to the example of Jesus, who was generous. They did lots of working through situations. Now, I'm wearing a t-shirt, and I've got a long sleeve shirt underneath, which it's a bit cold in our winter. Well, okay, 17's probably not too cold for some people. But this shirt I'm wearing is one of our Salvation Army in Australia approved casual uniforms, and it's for the Aboriginal and the First Nations of Australia, designed by them. Every part of it has a message. Just show you the shirt a little bit there. It's got all the different components, really mean a whole lot of things about coming together, black and white and all colours in between, working together. Now, my experiences with the First Nations people of Australia is that they don't rush things. And in my youth and ignorance and not understanding, I used to wonder, why are they so slow to make a decision? Why is it not happening? And during the years, I've been able to journey with a number of them. So I've been able to learn that what they call the yarning circles, and yarning is letting everyone's viewpoint be heard before the next steps are worked out. Inclusiveness, involving people who normally wouldn't speak much. So if there's times of silence while people wait, there's times of silence. Can be a little awkward sometimes, can't it? Well, for people like me who are an activist, it really can be awkward. But I've learnt so much from the wisdom that comes from the group together working things out. I've seen that the Aboriginal people and the Torres Strait Islander people live out their life in such a way that they care about each other. They really want to make wise decisions. And for those of them that have become Christians, they involve God in all of that. God's involved in every part of that decision making. It's a wonderful thing to be part of such a yarning circle. Y-A-R-N, yarn. And I know that also means wool, but in this instance, it's about listening, talking, resolving, listening, talking, resolving. Very much like another tool that's come out in recent years from the Salvation Army International Headquarters called Faith-Based Facilitation. And Lieutenant Colonel Dean Pallant had put a lot of work into that for his PhD and then a few other things that he was working through for the Army, for the Salvation Army. And it's another reflective process of thinking and involving people in every part of the process, hearing everyone's perspective, getting the wider wisdom, reflecting then with God on what are the next steps, and then continuing the circle again after you've made actions on those points. As we reach out to people, following Jesus telling us to, as he said, as he was just before he was ascended, recorded in Matthew, go into all the world and make disciples. It doesn't have to be a rush. Yes, we don't know when Jesus will come back again, but it doesn't have to be rushed so that there isn't integrity in the process, there isn't authenticity, transparency, there isn't care and love shown. We can take our time to build a relationship. And in these days, as we're relying very much on technology in the Western world and every other part of the world to reach people, to talk to people, because we can't talk to them personally for periods of time because of this pandemic, how do we do that in the best way possible? How do we authentically love people into God's kingdom? I pray that today some of the thoughts I've put out here will help. God bless you. Dear God, may you reach the world with your message through the best way you can use every one of us, so that we can help be part of the process in seeing people become disciples of yours, and then that they also move on to help others become disciples as well.